Good afternoon. I'm Jan Coe, Provost of the Cathedral, and on behalf of our Bishop, Mary Ann Buddy, our Dean, Randy Hollerith, who is away at a family wedding, and all of my colleagues here at the Cathedral, I'm delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's forum. We've had a big morning at the Cathedral with a big service as we continue to celebrate Juneteenth weekend. The Cathedral's Juneteenth celebrations are sponsored by the Cathedral College of Faith and Culture and are presented as part of Light in the Darkness, an ongoing series of public programs around the upcoming dedication of the new stained glass windows by renowned artist Kerry James Marshall, which are dedicated to racial justice and the ongoing struggle for civil rights. Today's conversation is the last of 4 public forums for our Windows project. We've been honored to host prior forums that addressed public monuments, understanding African American art and iconography, and how to tell our stories, our narratives, in ways that build racial justice. As people of faith, we're committed to the belief that we cannot be in right relationship with God until we are in right relationship with our neighbors. To that end, we look forward to hearing the contributions of our distinguished guests this afternoon as they speak to shaping a new tomorrow. And now I'm delighted to welcome my friend and colleague, the Reverend Canon Leonard L. Hamlin Sr., to the podium to introduce our guests.
Good afternoon. Certainly, as we have this opportunity, I must begin by wishing all of the fathers who are present and those who are joining us online, happy Father's Day. As we look forward to this panel on this afternoon, I certainly would like to welcome our panelists, and as they come forward, that we want to jump right into this needed and continuing conversation. First, I want to welcome Michelle Miller, who is the co-host of CBS Saturday Morning, a CBS, of course, news correspondent, works in, of course, many different areas. And so as we're thankful to have her today, she brings a perspective with her as, of course, a news correspondent and author, whose book will be made available to you for those, and she will be signing those shortly after, entitled Belonging. We welcome Dr. Eric Motley, who is the Deputy Director of the National Gallery of Art, has served in numerous appointed positions, as well as government positions, as well as here in the chapter of the Cathedral, and is certainly leading the new windows placement. And then we're grateful as well to have the Reverend Dr. Keith Bird, who is the first Vice President of the Progressive National Baptist Convention. He also is one of our local neighbors, pastor of Zion Baptist Church here in Washington, D.C. So we're grateful to have them participate with us on today. Testing. Well, certainly, as we have this opportunity, I'm thankful for this conversation, a needed conversation that we want to jump in and make the most of our time with. As many who are gathered here know, this conversation has been motivated by the Washington National Cathedral's efforts to replace what used to be Confederate windows and now being replaced with windows who have been specially designed by artist Kerry James Marshall. But it has not been about the windows or just the windows. It has been about all of the meaningful symbolism, the messages that have come from that. And so we're grateful to welcome you, to have you all here, certainly as we get an opportunity to talk about shaping a new tomorrow. Our last 3 conversations have really been rooted in where we've come from. We have dug deeply into what has caused us to be where we are. But what is it to have a conversation that lacks hope? What is it like to have conversations that just bring us to the present but drop us off? I'm thankful for the three of you because both in your experiences as well as being authors, that you have talked about hope. So we have this conversation today that I want to encourage us to, of course, share in, but looks at community, certainly Dr. Mockley, with the hope that you bring, and the faith with Dr. Bird here. But I'd like to start the conversation off with Michelle Miller. Certainly, and I mentioned to you very quickly, I very much enjoyed reading your new publication, Belonging, for so many different reasons, and your life story. Certainly the title is intriguing in and of itself, of belonging. But you make this wonderful statement in here, and we heard a little bit about it this morning from the preaching of Reverend Warnock, about American Story. You were sitting and you talked about your hand being over your mother's hand. And in that moment, you were wrestling with this American story that had been shaped by race. Can you unpack why that was so powerful and meaningful, and on this Juneteenth, why we should be thinking about this story and telling our stories?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. At our very core as human beings, it is necessary for us to have placement in something that puts us in a family. Community is belonging. Belonging is community. And when I think of, certainly, we talk about origin stories. My origin story was that I was born in the unrest of the 1960s to a father who adored me, a black man in Los Angeles, California, a surgeon, and to a mother who to this day does not acknowledge my existence. She was Hispanic American, first generation. Important to state this because the fabric of our nation is all of these incredible communities coming together, and yet not. And so in unpacking that, the story of immigrants and their hopes to ascend to the American dream, her family was hoping to ascend through assimilation. She could pass for white. And whiteness in the 1960s was an assurance of the American dream. And also in my origin story is that I'm a child born out of wedlock. And imagine the shame also that I was born into. So without all of those things, I wouldn't be, one, who I am. Two, my need to belong in community would not be what it is. Every single one of us, and I'll begin with a raise of hands. How many of you understand what I am describing? If my story resonates, just what I've told you, raise your hand. Keep it raised. How many of you have learned that you, in your family, hold a secret that does not follow through with what is considered a nuclear family tradition? Keep those hands raised. Now tell me how many of you have felt cast out, abandoned, unloved by the circumstances of your birth or by the presence in the society that we live. I am speaking to all of that. And it is my mission, and I hope that I am not speaking too long, but it is my mission to help people through that sense of loss, that sense of non-alignment with community that drives me. It drives my storytelling, and it also drives my truth-telling of stories that have not been heard, histories that are uncovered, and the secrets that have been untold, because that is truly the story of America.
We're grateful for that because as we're here today, the Cathedral is about telling stories. And these stories are impactful. They need to be told. Certainly, Dr. Motley, in your story and coming across here, one of the things that struck me, even as I was looking at your writings as well, is that while you talked about those who raised you, you made this statement about having bone-deep confidence, which I thought was a wonderful and powerful statement that we all need to have, and we bring to, as we said, these difficult situations. But where did you get that confidence from? We look at what you've been able to achieve in spite of that, and I love the story about, and I encourage you to read his writings as well, to look at the book in the Globe, but where did you get that bone-deep confidence?
Gosh, that's a great story. Part of it's just being totally naive and totally unaware that I'm not to be intimidated and that I'm not to be challenged by others' expectations. But I think more importantly, it was my grandparents who raised me.
Me too.
My grandparents raised me. I was born of a young woman who was aged 19, who had been adopted by these grandparents, and she gave birth to a bundle of unformed possibility. That's me.
I love that.
And she was not married, out of wedlock. And my grandparents had a real sense that you're no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here, and whether or not you realize that the world is unfolding just as it should. And so all of the promises of America, all the promises of this community that I grew up in are yours. And only you can decide where you're going to go and how you're going to get there. But we're with you. And when you have very little, except the love and the encouragement and the nurturing of your family and your church, you can step out boldly and go where you never imagined going. And so that's the bone-deep confidence that was inspired by my grandparents and by the community that I grew up in. And I should also say it was inspired by the example of the people in that community. In 1880, my little community was created by a group of freed slaves. And they had just newly been emancipated. They had hopes and dreams and aspirations of what it meant to be an American, what it meant to live into this idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And their example of forming a community and making a commitment to one another to live into community and to support one another was a profound example and influence in my life generations later.
As we look at this today, obviously we're in the Cathedral. Dr. Bird, we're here talking about the importance as well of faith in all of these situations on Juneteenth. And you're, of course, one of the leaders of Dr. King's convention that really came about because this struggle of race was at the center. And how do we really hold on to our faith? And would you talk about, with Juneteenth, you probably were preaching about it this morning, but in this, on a moment like today, is Juneteenth. How should we look at this when we're making these changes? Why change is necessary?
Thank you, Cannon, for that question, and thank you for both of you. I'm honored to be on this panel. I was thinking about my story. I said, Lord have mercy. But what a wonderful, all of us have stories. And this whole notion of creating space is that all of us have a place to tell those stories. And so it's awesome. It's amazing that we're in this beautiful nave of the National Cathedral, and with all of the rose windows, and these windows, it's just beautiful. It's a space that someone thought enough of to create where we could share our stories. And on Juneteenth, what we celebrate and commemorate is the fact that people who had been forgotten were forgotten once again. That people who had been marginalized and their humanity had been devalued were forgotten. That when you don't see a person as human, you don't have to listen to their story because they're not worthy of their story being told. And so how apropos it is for us to be in this great nave where we really don't need these microphones because it was built to hear and to carry sound, that all of our voices can be heard and can be included, and that space can be created for you to tell your story, you to tell my story, you to tell your story, me to tell my story, and none of us feel less than because we share our stories, but all of us feel better because we've heard and we have different aspects. The faith ties into that. Certainly my faith as a Christian is that I believe, and Christians believe, that Christ came to create space, to create a place where we all, no matter what our backgrounds are, can be in relationship with our Creator, which is God our Father, and in community with one another. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8, you know I'm a Baptist preacher, I have to tag a text. Let the church say amen.
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 Peter is talking to a church that is being persecuted. Isn't that what racial injustice is? Oppression is persecution. Sometimes we have to connect the dots for people, because one of the worst things is to be enchained and not know it. There are a whole lot of people who are kept from telling their stories, and they don't realize that that's oppression. Peter says these words. He said, the end is near. Brothers, sisters, love each other fervently. Because love, here it is, 1 Peter 4 and 8, covers a multitude of sins. That somehow love, real love, and that's the fundamental ethic of Christianity, is that which allows us to be bridged, connected together, even though we may have some differences, even though we may have some offenses. But love is the bridge that keeps us connected. And when you're connected, you have a better chance to hear somebody else's story.
I really do have to say amen to that.
Amen.
I am grateful for that, because I could really toss this back to any one of you who are sitting here right now, especially the love. Because, Michelle, in your book as well, the way that you talked about family and community and the role that they played in helping you to be able to get where you are, was community, and what did you learn really in this journey that would give us hope today about those who are around and how they pour into our lives? There was so much that you talked about, even in the conclusion of looking back and saw what you had versus what you missed. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of that?
Well, I do know this, that we all have the power to change a life in a moment.
Yes.
A meeting and a conversation, a lunch, really can change someone's trajectory. And that has happened to me over and over again. I think about that instance in which I told my story on CBS News. And it was a 10-second turn in a story on George Floyd and the impact of the last 30 years of coverage of social justice in policing, or lack thereof, in making that moment. And through the story, someone seeing it, someone else was contacted. And I learned that this woman was impacted by my father in a chance meeting. And I meet this woman 50, almost 60 years after my dad made that moment. It was such a stark message to me about how you can change someone's life. She was meeting with me 60 years to tell me what a difference my father made in her life. And so I take that throughout my life, as Hillary Clinton amplified an old African proverb: it takes a village to raise a child. A village raised me, a village of mothers and uncles and my father and my grandmother and women who stepped in and helped to shape me, even though I didn't realize it in the moment that I was being shaped. And isn't that a blessing? Isn't that a blessing? Fortifying, as my Aunt Edna would call it. Children need fortifying. So let's get to it.
It's certainly, Dr. Motley, you might even feel this coming your way because of the hope, the way that you speak about your community, your story, which is a powerful story as well. Can you add a little bit more about that and all of those individuals that played such a role as you lead, of course, the work of us replacing these windows, that we're in the process of trying to shape others, to allow them to be part of a story, to tell their stories. Speak a little bit about that yourself and the importance of that.
I noted to you that in 1880, this little place that I grew up, a place in evidence of God's grace called Madison Park in Montgomery, Alabama, was founded by a group of freed slaves. They pulled their resources together and they bought a plantation. Now, can you imagine a group of slaves in Alabama buying a plantation and making it work? And this is what we know. We know that it was the first plantation that was acquired in the South by a group of freed slaves. They made a covenant to one another to create community. They built a school, they built a church. Julius Rosenwald, many years later, matched their gift so that another school could be built to add more inclusivity for other students. You know Julius?
I did that story. Told that story.
That's right.
And so in this incredible network, and Martin Luther King has a wonderful phrase, we're all a part of an inescapable network of mutuality. We're tied in a single garment of destiny, affirming that no man is an island to himself or to herself. And in this place, in evidence of God's grace, my grandfather's grandfather, being one of those founders, taught his grandson how to plant seed, how to build a house, and who would have ever imagined that that grandfather later would have adopted a neighbor's daughter when she was dying to give her life and opportunity, and then who would later take me into that same house, the same house that his grandfather built in that open space in that plantation, to feed me from the same land with the same descendants who are my friends and the people that I grew up with. And in that community, church and school, we all affirmed. And Eli Madison was the principal founder, and he could read and write. And he understood that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They were emancipated long before there was an Emancipation Proclamation, because deep down in their souls, they knew they were free and meant to be free. And those values were instilled not only in me, but all the other people who grew up in that community. And I'll just add a footnote, if I may.
Please.
No one in my family had gone to college. And so my grandparents rearing me, or raising me, as we would say in Alabama, my grandparents rearing me felt this incredible responsibility to make sure that I got an education and that I was afforded the opportunity of enlightenment. And so they called together all of these retired teachers that they knew in this town, the granddaughters of Eli Madison, who had founded the place, and they came by my house every day for 2 years and rehabilitated me. And we started every session at the dining room table, these 4 retired teachers in their 70s and 80s. And they started with my having to stand and recite the Declaration of Independence, the preamble to the Constitution of the United States. This is first grade, mind you, because they wanted me to understand that this is your land. And in order for you to preserve it and to maintain it, you have to understand the rights and the responsibilities that are afforded to you as a citizen. You can't have anyone interpreting it for you. You have to understand it. You have to translate it from mind to heart. And then, of course, there was James Weldon Johnson's Lift Every Voice and Sing and the affirmation of faith. And those were the tenets of my everyday life for the first 10 years of my upbringing.
You know, as we're gathering here, and I wish all of a sudden that we did have even more time with this, because this conversation could go in so many different directions. Dr. Bird, certainly as we're in the cathedral, and it was noted, of course, with Pastor Warnock preaching here this morning, King delivering his last sermon, you're here today in this message of faith. While we're speaking about all of these opportunities, I don't want to, of course, make it seem like we don't have great challenges. But as we face these challenges, how or what would you suggest, and that you're often lifting, that we should be focusing on to make certain that we don't lose our faith in the midst of these difficulties and in these moments?
I think it's amazing that we are here full circle, creating space, shaping lives, in front of the pulpit where Dr. King gave his last public address. And when we think about then and come full circle to now, we see progress. And that progress ought to incentivize, it ought to give us some hope. And yet we see there's so much work undone. I love hearing the stories that we're hearing. And I just want to suggest to us today that by faith we must continue to have hope in God. And here is something that's going to sound crazy in the climate in which we're living and the goodness of humanity. There are still some good people. There are still caring people. When I say good people, people that recognize that all of us, quoting Dr. King, all of us are in this together. White, black, yellow, brown, we're all in this together. Urban, rural. And if we could keep our eyes on our commonalities and not allow, excuse me for this, the press, the political pundits to determine what is important to us, I think that's where we lose hope. We lose hope when other people tell us that we're different. When other people tell us that your children shouldn't go to school with my children. When other people tell us those kinds of things, that I have to be pro-life, don't get me started. Or I have to be pro-choice. I don't have to be either one. I can be right down the middle. I can love God and love the privilege and opportunity that God gives through women to give life and want to protect that. Yes. And at the same time realize the humanity in a woman and her God-given right to make decisions about her own body. I can be both. Yes. I don't have to be pitted one against the other. That's where the hope is, that there are more people who believe that than there are people who believe in dividing us. And I find great hope in God and in the goodness or the God in other people. That's where our hope lies.
I very much appreciate that as you speak about so many people and the value of so many that played roles in our lives. Michelle, your whole story is about that, and people who have played roles and the value of the roles that they played. You have been facing challenges, and you face those challenges coming through. But other folks that they might hear it, how'd you make it? Just how'd you make it, in your own words, a little bit more? How would you describe that? Yes.
Okay. Well, first I have to take pause because anyone who is out and calls himself the press, who is out there dividing and not, there are certain people who call themselves the press that are not truly people who are part of the media. I just, as a journalist, I have to say, generally speaking, it is not in your mission to inform, to divide. That's just, I just have to say that.
Let's clap for that. Thank you for that.
I mean,
that's
it's true.
That's why we have hope.
So I have been known for two things. I've been known for speaking my mind, and then I've also been known for putting my foot in my mouth. Truly. And it's part of that conversation with yourself when you tell yourself, know the difference between being able to make a change, make a difference, or whether or not you will have the power in that moment. Like knowing when to hold your tongue, knowing when not to, knowing when to hold them, knowing when to fold them. And what I will say is that I have always had great mentors, and I believe this is something that every person in any field can live by. Make sure you have your mentors and your sponsors. Make sure the people who are doing what it is you want to do, you listen to. And understand that, it goes across all boundaries. Some of my greatest champions have been white men. Mm-hmm. People are people. I believe in my people, but I also believe in allyship. Because we certainly would not be where we are today without the good people, no matter where they come from, no matter what they look like, no matter who they believe in. It is something I believe in my soul. And I think that part of the problem in this country is that the heroes for so long were from one particular race, one particular gender, one particular persuasion, religious affiliation, and if you didn't fit in that alignment or in that group, then you weren't considered to matter. And part of, I think about poor Southern white men who didn't own land back in the day, who really weren't citizens either. They were left in the cold. And I don't think people want to know their true history, how a great number of them fled the Confederacy and fled the Army based on their beliefs or their understanding of what was fair and what was not fair. And I think that part of the movement in the whole window campaign, you need to give the people a sense of who their new heroes can be, who look like them.
Yes, yes.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Very much so.
The Newt Knights of the world, you think about the John Browns of the world have been ridiculed in our history, when truly their stories are there to be told. We just have to tell them.
Yes. Well, looking forward to telling these stories. Dr. Motley, we're here, as we know, in September, we're going to have new windows that are in place. And while we've been grateful for you, just leadership across the board, you said yes to leading this. And I could really ask this, I know, from a very sort of appropriate sort of phrasing of why you are agreed to be co-chair, but personally, what I would love to hear, because story and your experience, why was this so important to you?
Gosh. There are so many stories that are not told, that are omitted. And the dean and all of the theologians and ministers here at the Cathedral have created this space as a house of prayer for all people. And I want every person who's a friend of mine, regardless of their ethnicity, their background, their creed or faith, to feel that they could come into this space. And what we realized was an omitted narrative. For 70 years, 2 stained glass windows were ensconced here at this cathedral, the Robert E. Lee and the Stonewall Jackson windows. And we celebrate everyone's identity. We celebrate everyone's contribution to this country, but we also recognize the ironies of American history. And we recognize it's important to tell the stories and the complexities both of faith and of our own narrative as a people striving towards the promised land. And for individuals to come into this space, this sacred space, and to feel that they could not fully realize their own aspirations because of 2 windows was very problematic. And so it was decided that the windows would be removed. And the windows have found a right place. They're part of a larger story that's being shared about American history and its own complexities. But we've also decided that we would commission an artist who could help us to reimagine this space by telling a story that is more inclusive and that is more representative. At the high altar, we have Howard Thurman.
Yes.
At the back porch, we have Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And I think one of the great ironies, the placement of the windows is right next to the Woodrow Wilson tomb. And so for people to come into this place and to find themselves in its expressivity and to feel at home was critical. And I think we, as you well know, found an artist who is a master, not just at art, but at storytelling and helping to build bridges and helping to create understanding.
You know, having that hope and being able to pass that hope along is important. Certainly, Dr. Bird, as we're talking about these stories and our faith and the difficulties that sometimes we are aware of, we certainly recognize the need to continue to press forward and to continue to move forward. This day, and of course, Juneteenth, we find our hope in certain values. But there are many who are probably going to look at the moment and say that we haven't yet made progress, or to think that we haven't. As King said, we've come a long way, but we've got a long, long way to go. Would you say that we have come a long way? And talk to us about a little bit of where you'd like to see us go.
We have come a long way. These stories that you just heard are indications that we've come a long way. We got a long way to go.
Thank you. It'd be easy for me to say that as moderator. I needed you to say that.
We got a long way to go. We still have people who are divisive. We still have racism in America. And I know that there are candidates who have thrown their hat in the ring to run for president who say that America is not racist. I'd like to believe that. I'd like to hope that it's not racist. But what else can we say about a system that is opposed or seems to be slanted towards people that are not white? And I know that sounds harsh to hear, but canceling books from schools and trying to stifle people's voices is not going to make that better. Don't ignore it, fix it. And we can fix it, because I still believe that there are enough good-hearted people of all faiths. I'm going to say this and then get in trouble. All faiths, all genders, all sexual orientations, all everything. There are enough good-hearted people to not just change America, but to change this world. Why do I believe that? Because I serve a God of hope, a God who all of us, if we look deep enough inside ourselves, will find him. Even the atheists will find in him or her that which they did not know existed. Hint, hint, that's God. And he speaks in us, to us, and through us. And if we tap into that, then justice will be the order of the day, not something we celebrate periodically.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
That's what I do. For those people who are sometimes confused because they see, wow, we've had our first black president. We have, so many who are now educated. All these doors have opened. What is the difference between now and the promised land? I mean, let's imagine for a moment.
That's easy. You'll stop having firsts. How old is America? Civics lesson. How old, does anybody know how old this country is? What will we celebrating July 4? 200 and what?
Somebody do the math, Mark.
Okay, don't worry about it. It's over 200 years old.
246.
So we're going to dance around the cathedral because in 200 and X number of years, you finally got a first black president. Are we going to celebrate? Are we really going to dance around? So we've made it. Look, there he is. You got to be kidding me. When you look at the list of presidents on the wall, and that list begins to look more like what America looks like, then you can say we've at the promised land. When you got black men, black women, Latino, when you got all kinds, that's when you can say you've made it. When everything, and this is no offense to anybody, but I'm just saying what I'm saying. I look out there and I see America. You look at the wall of presidents, and how much of America do you see? One black man, one minority, no women in 200 plus years. This is not hard. It's not hard. And we're not mad at nobody. I'm not mad. I'm celebrating like you are. But I don't want us to get comfortable. We can't afford to get comfortable. We must, and I'll say this and I'll be quiet. My thing for my children is this. I want to give my children, at a minimum, what I've had. Optimally, I want to give my children more than I had. Every American should be like that. We should give our children a country that's better than how we found it. Better than what we've seen. I believe our country is better than what my grandmother experienced. And I want my children to experience better than what I experienced. I don't want them to be on the stage and somebody asks them, what do you think we can do better for as it relates to creating space and racial equality? I want them to be talking about something else that will advance the world than continuing to talk about how we can get along with people that don't look like us. That's foolish.
Dr. Motley.
When people have access to health care, when every kid in this country is ensured a good education despite their color or the zip code that they live in, that is when we'll come to the promised land. My great fear is that moments like this, we pause and celebrate, and remember. But I also remember that from this pulpit, the last Sunday that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King preached, he told a wonderful little parable. He told a parable about a man who was living freely in life, and he climbed up a mountain. And on his way going up, he saw a framed photograph of King George III. And he went up the mountain. His name was Rip Van Winkle. He went up the mountain and he slept for about 14 years. And then he came to, and he came back down the mountain, and he saw another photograph, and it was a picture of George Washington. He slept through a revolution.
Yeah.
And our great fear is that we've become too complacent, and that all around us, the changing geography and topography of politics and theology and society is catching us unaware.
Yes.
And we're sleeping through a revolution.
Yeah, we've gotten comfortable.
Sounds like he's talking about being woke. Go ahead.
No, but I think it's the moral complacency, Reverend, I think it's the moral complacency of a leisure in secular society.
Being woke.
It is that we have to be active. We have to be working. Because I appreciate the question that you asked, and I'd like to turn that back. I'd like to turn that back because you started something obviously here. What does change look like then to you? What does that change that we are hoping for, what would that look like?
You know, as I asked the question, I thought to myself, I had not thought or imagined what that would look like. But I think it's not just a country that is so incredibly wealthy as we are, that holds the wealth in the hands of the 1%, that it is a class game change. It certainly is a religious game change. It is an ethnic game change and you're starting to see it, because when I am in places like in cities, in urban cities, I see such a multiplicity of people together. We were in Canada last week, my husband and I, and we were the guests of the ambassador, David Cohen. And that country has a 2% black population, less than 10% minority population. Am I right about that, honey? And yet in the cities, in these urban areas of concentration, you had all kinds of people together, couples, people who were who have claimed belonging to one another in a way that they stood before God or stood before their family, and they pledged one another to one another. And so I see that, I see a flow of ideas, and I see a flow of exchange to where none of it matters. And we all know, and what I am so hopeful about is how many people, one, are curious about our history. So thank you all for coming. Really and truly, it is so brilliant to see so many white faces in here. I mean, I love seeing that, because it means that we matter to them. Our discussion matters to them. Of course it matters to us. But racism is not our problem to fix. It isn't.
Right.
Maybe prejudice, maybe bias based on our experiences, all of that. Doesn't mean we aren't biased or we don't hold prejudices. But the ism is baked into the society, and rooting that out takes all of us, and certainly those who are in power. It isn't our fight alone. And so once we tackle the systems,
Well said.
once we tackle the institutions that hold tight to it, and you see And I've come to the realization, I was having a discussion with Reverend Warnock about it, this theory, seeing this pendulum shift between making strides and then the backtracking, is that we've got to teach our children that this is it's a never-ending story. It's a never-ending journey. Like, it's hard for us to really kind of fathom, because you want to see the goal line.
That's exactly right.
Right? You want to see the goal line. But if we teach our children and we teach ourselves that there may not be an end to this fight, then we're better prepared to fight.
Yes, I agree, and certainly as we will be moving shortly to taking questions from those who are online and others, you asked this question, and I'll just respond as we're preparing those questions about what we want it to look like. Because when we have individuals such as yourself, and I'm privileged to be able to join in this conversation with the three of you, there are those who could look at the three of you and say, see, there's nothing wrong. You have made it. What my hope is that one day we have a system where it does not require some to work 10 times harder and then system take credit for your success. To say that, see, it works.
Well said, Janet.
And here's one. True equality is when I don't have to do twice as much to be half as good. I can be just as mediocre as the white man. No, I'm being very serious. It's I have to work 3 times harder. And I'm not saying that white men are mediocre. What I'm saying is that if I'm working twice as hard than the person next to me,
That's right.
you know, then clearly, like, I'm striving, I'm working hard. I may not be the best, but I know, because I do more. I have to. And when I don't have to do that, as a woman or as a black woman, as, you know, a mixed race woman, when I don't have to do that for the same amount of money, three jobs for one, that's when we have arrived.
Yeah, the assumptions that get made.
And as we transition, can I just say the one thing really quick? I'm a Baptist minister, and
Finally.
I would be neglecting every close in our sermons. There is an end to this game. There is a place where justice is the order of the day.
Yes.
There is a place where right rules the day.
Yes.
And I'm not saying we ought to wait to the by and by, but I'm pressing my way to make it more on earth as it is in heaven. I mean, I would be remiss if I sat in the nave on the pulpit of the National Cathedral and then I did not get some eschatological hope that there is a place that we're going. I'm not going to tune in, I'm not going to do that, but I could.
Yes.
Because it's because of that belief that Dr. King and many others faced dogs and hoses. They didn't think that they would see it in their lifetime, but they knew one day.
Yes.
And that's the hope. We're always looking for that one day. One day, my children will be judged by the content of their character, not the color. One day. So I don't want us to leave here thinking, well, we meant, one day.
That's right.
One day. The mountains will be, I'm not even going to get into all that. I feel like doing it, go right up there and finish it off, but I know Dr. Warnock did it. But we have to have that hope. We have to believe that what we're pressing for is going to be a reality. David said this way, I would faint and lose heart unless I believed I would see the goodness of the Lord where? In the land of the living. One day, I may not see it, my children may not see it, my grandchildren may not see it, but I work today because one day somebody whose last name is B-Y-R-D will see and reap the benefits of our labor. One day. I'm sorry, I had to get that out. One day.
Amen.
One day. Don't know when it will be, but one day.
It is certainly, as Margaret is coming, and I want to thank Margaret, who leads our programs department, who has worked so hard on all the programs and continues to work on it. She's sharing questions with
Big round of applause for Margaret. She's awesome. My girl.
You started something here because I do want to say I agree with you as we look at the hope for the future, but we all have to know our role right now, in the present. And at best, all of us, our best role is simply to be seed scatterers. That's simply our role, because we drink water from wells we had not dug.
Absolutely.
We eat from vineyards we did not plant. All of us are doing that. And so where we run into trouble is when we believe that we will eat from the trees we have put in the ground.
Lord have mercy.
When we're planting for others who are coming behind us. And so I'm grateful today because you all have been doing the work to plant seeds. And many lives have been touched, will be touched, are being touched because of the stories that you have shared, the work that you are doing, the hope that you continue to bring, which both who are present and online are better benefiting from here, as we say so often in the sacred institutions, from here to the uttermost parts. The story is being told. Well, I want to ask just a couple of questions, as we know we're coming to a close, from that have been shared with us. What should the cathedral do after the windows are installed? How should we keep this conversation going?
There are so many more stories to be told. We're in the story-making business. And I think we have to collectively decide not just how to tell those stories, but to make sure those stories are reflective in the interior and the exterior of this place. The Native American story is not told in this place. And I could just go down the list of all those who are not represented in the windows, in the statuary, in the service. The service is more reflective of the diversity of this country than any other aspect of the nave. And I think that's a conversation that will, but it's not just looking at the windows, but it's engaging people in an ongoing dialogue about the windows once they come into the space.
Are there other things that you believe when you look at your perspectives? And I'd like to hear from the two of you as well. You're here in the cathedral as well as stepping in. But this could be, we're going to install these windows, but how do we keep this conversation? Or what should a place like this that you're in today be doing?
I would just say, speaking firmly from my African American heritage, Baptist heritage, we have a saying that the rocks can't outcry us. The Bible says even the rocks will cry out if we keep silent. Don't let the rocks outcry you. And in a real sense, the beauty of this nave and this wonderful, awesome, awesome, awesome place are the rocks. The stained glass, again, will be in the rocks, and all of the rocks and the glass and all of those things will tell a story. But even in all of the beauty and the great commissioning of the artist, none of that will be as impactful as shaping on people than the spirit of this place. When people leave, they may get a picture, which is just a snapshot of those stained glass windows. They won't be able to fully appreciate it in a picture. But when they leave after a sermon like what Reverend Warnock gave today, when they leave after an experience of people that they've come in contact with, like I did with you on Friday, I left here and immediately called my wife and started telling her about the beauty of this place that I have been in D.C. all of my life. I've been in the National Cathedral. I graduated from Wesley Theological Seminary from this place, but walking through it and taking it in and hearing the history behind it. To me, the spirit of the place, making sure it is a place where people can come and see the best in other people. And then when they leave, having celebrated all of the wonderful things that are here, like the COVID virus, it spreads from person to person without a whole lot of intentionality, simply because they've been in this sacred space. Keep doing that. Change the walls, make it more inclusive. But by God, the things that you're doing, the stories that you're telling, the convening that you're doing, keep doing that. It is making a difference. And you may not be able to eat the fruit from the tree that you have seeded, but somewhere, know that somebody is nourishing and flourishing because they were impacted, shaped some kind of way, moved some kind of way by being in this place. I am a native Washingtonian. I'm telling you, I have told at least 50 people, if you count service today, at least 350 people about my experience for 30 minutes on Friday in this sacred space. Keep doing that.
That's why I like spending time with this guy. There's a question that has come, and it really is for all three of you. And this is very practical to find the hope. What individual things do each of you do to remain optimistic about the work ahead?
To remain
optimistic about the work that's in front of us. How do you keep your hope?
I get up every morning. I don't know. I think part of first of all, I believe I'm tremendously blessed with an outlook of joy and an ability and a lens to see people in a way that I only see their goodness until they change my mind. And that is a wonderful, wonderful space to be in. And so I was born with an optimistic spirit. I have my moments of melancholy, but I know that is a blessing, because I know that so many of our brothers and sisters are not born with joy in their lives, just a joyous spirit. So I think that would be my answer. The nourishment of family and friends and gratitude, appreciation and gratitude is what keeps me going. Just knowing I could be a whole lot worse.
What do you do?
Gosh, you took the one word that I was going to use, and that's gratitude. It's a wonderful burden to carry, the burden of gratitude. When I was leaving Madison Park, I left and gone away to Scotland to school, came back, was working at the White House.
Is that how you lost your accent?
I never had a really rich Southern accent, but I can work on it with you. And my grandmother said to me, one of the tutors who helped me is dying, and you need to come back and visit with her. And it was Easter, and so I flew back from Washington to go back to Madison Park. And as I was making my way through the blackberry field to her house, her name was Aunt Shine. Her name was Emma Madison Bell, but we called her Aunt Shine because everywhere she went, light followed. And as I was making my way through the blackberry fields, I started to think of all the things she taught me, the Declaration of Independence and Latin, helped me with my history. And I thought, she's going to be so proud to know that her investment in me has manifested in such a form. And I walked into the house, and the nurse said to me, she hasn't spoken in days. And I stood next to her bed, and I grabbed her hand, and she spoke. Wow. And she looked at me, and she said, if you think I'm satisfied and happy because you got an education and you're over there in Scotland and you're working for the President of the United States, I'm not. I didn't make the investment in you for that purpose. Yes. It's so that you can give back. For to whom much is given, much is not expected, much is required.
Dr. Bird, what is it that you
that
practice?
deserves a clap. That's awesome. That's awesome. I would just say two, very succinctly: faith and family keep me motivated. Faith in a God who has bestowed so much upon me, and I believe it and live. To whom much is given, much is required. And my obligation to God for what he's done for, to, and through me, and then my family. I have two African-American sons, both of whom, my second son just graduated from Bowie State University, so both of whom have graduated from college, the other one is married, and they're living their lives. But what can I do better for them, for my grandchildren? How can I? And some people don't take personal charge, personal obligation. It's enough to complain about, oh, this is not doing well. Got a lot of people who are complaining. I don't think that's positive. I forget who said it, but it was said some people choose to curse the darkness, other people simply light a candle. I'm a light a candle kind of guy. Let's see what we can do, where we can do it, with whom we can do it. Everybody doesn't work with you, but my thing is work with those who will, and let's make the world a better place. And that keeps me, the thought that I could sleep through a revolution keeps me waking up every morning because I want to be a part of whatever God is doing in this season.
Wow, wow, amen. Hey, Reverend. I keep a quote above my desk. I keep the quote in my pocket. I carry it with me everywhere I go. It's Reinhold Niebuhr, the social philosopher and theologian, who said, "Nothing that is worth doing could be accomplished in a lifetime. Therefore, we're saved by hope. Nothing that is good or beautiful makes complete sense in its immediate context of history. Therefore, we're saved by faith. Nothing, no matter how virtuous, could be accomplished alone. Therefore, we're saved by love."
Yes. We are grateful for this day, and as I close, you immediately, as you said, you keep it above your desk. Made me think about, my father is no longer here, of course, and he wrote in one of the early Bibles, something that many may be familiar with, but as we all wrestle with time and trying to be so successful, it's that old quote that says, "Time is not measured by the years that you live, but by the deeds that you do and the joy that you give." And I often am taken back to that. And I thank you all as we bring this moment in for reminding me, not only about where we've come from, but I think for all of us where we can go. And so on behalf really of our dean, our provost who is here, for all of our colleagues and the Cathedral, our online audience, we say thank you. Thank you for your voice. Thank you for your stories. We certainly wish God's blessings upon the three of you for family and the work that is unseen ahead. But knowing that if I have to think about the work and think about you all, we're in good hands for where we're going to be going. To all, before we leave, I certainly want to thank, as I said, Margaret Rawls, our Director of Programs, who has been working so much to help make this possible, to Anna, who has worked with her, other staff, to Janae Barber, who is running around somewhere else and helping as well. But we're grateful for this full day. And it really takes all of us working together to make sure that anything is a success. So on today, certainly as Dr. Warnock began the morning with us, for those who are online, I hope when we leave here, no matter what we see ahead of us, no matter how heavy the load, no matter how difficult the task, what we will take joy in is that we can accomplish it if we do it together. So we thank you for coming. May God bless each and every one on this day and for the days again. Happy Father's Day to each and every one.
Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day.
I invite those to meet Michelle Miller just over by the Politics and Prose table for her book.
What a pleasure it is to meet you.